نشوف أول حواراتنا التي أجريناها في واشنطن مع كريس جارفيس رئيس بعثة صندوق النقد الدولي المسؤولة عن مصر. هنسمع هذا الحوار أجريناه في واشنطن في اجتماعات الربيع لصندوق النقد والبنك الدوليين. نسأله عن مصر، عن الدعم، عن هل طلبت مصر قرضا من الصندوق. كل الإجابات من واشنطن. سيد كريس، دعني أبدأ بالسؤال الذي سألته مرارا وتكرارا. هل طلبت الحكومة المصرية خلال اجتماعاتها مع صندوق النقد الدولي برنامج فني وقرض من صندوق النقد الدولي؟
Well, thank you for inviting me to talk. We have not had any request for a program from Egypt. If there was such a request, the IMF would be happy to help and support Egypt, but that's a matter for the government and the central bank to decide.
هل تتوقعون شيئا في الطريق، طلبا في الطريق؟
We've been in a long dialogue with the Egyptian authorities, and I would say maybe there's been too much focus on whether there'll be a program or not. The dialogue encompasses a lot of things. We're able to exchange views on the Egyptian economy. We can give the benefit of our analysis based on what happens in other countries and our own ability to put things into a big framework. We've also given a lot of technical assistance to Egypt on things like tax issues and banking supervision, things that may sound a bit boring but which are actually quite important for the economy. And so there's a long-term relationship. I see that continuing. I don't have any immediate expectations of a significant change in that.
إذا كان هناك طلب لقرض، ما هو سقف هذا الطلب؟ يعني كم يمكن أن يطلب المصريون الحد إيه لهذه الطلبات؟
We don't really have ceilings on IMF loans. It really depends on the need of the country and also on the strength of an economic program. The amount of an IMF program is usually almost the last thing to be discussed. What's much more important are what are the policies that underlie it. And maybe on that I could say that there's two main things. First, the policies really have to reflect what the government wants to do. We're focused on helping governments achieve their objectives. And in the case of Egypt, it's pretty clear that the priorities are creating jobs, especially for young people, but more broadly as well, and also maintaining macroeconomic stability. And by that we mean things like a low inflation rate, a budget deficit that can be financed and is manageable, an external balance of payments position where there aren't foreign currency shortages. The other thing I would say is that for the long term, what a program would try to achieve is getting Egypt to a place where it's financially independent at the end of that program.
ماذا تعني بالاستقلال الاقتصادي؟
Egypt doesn't need to depend on the IMF or the Gulf countries or anybody else for support. And I saw that President Sisi emphasized that when he took office, that was one of his goals during his period of office, and I thought that's very consistent and compatible with the kind of objectives that we have for countries.
ولكن كيف تقيمون البرنامج الاقتصادي الحالي لحكومة شريف إسماعيل؟
I think there's a lot of good things in it, and there's also a lot of good actions that have been taken. What will be important over the next few months, I think, is to follow through on that program. For example, on the budget that's been sent to Parliament. It is basically a good budget and it includes some important measures, but it's really important that they be enacted for Egypt. On the side of the central bank, we very much welcome Governor Ammer's recent statement that he would like to see more flexibility in the exchange rate. We think it's important that there be what we would call a market clearing rate, which is to say that there's a match between the supply and demand of foreign exchange. That's the way you get rid of foreign exchange shortages.
بصراحة هل كان خفض سعر صرف العملة المصرية مؤخرا ب 14.5% بنصيحة أو طلب من صندوق النقد الدولي؟
No, the central bank took that decision themselves, and the new governor in particular, and specifically took that decision. But we think it was a good move. We also welcome both his statements around that and the decision to increase policy interest rates after that, which is important to make sure that the exchange rate movement doesn't translate into higher inflation.
بالرغم طبعا أن هذا أمر يسعد الاستثمار، ولكن يعني خلق موجة تضخمية جديدة تؤثر على الأقل دخلا. كيف يمكن للحكومة أن تتعامل مع ذلك في رأيكم؟
Well, I think they need a comprehensive package which aims at addressing both the external problem and things like the budget problem and the problem of job creation. And that's why one of the things I quite like about the government's program is that it is trying to address all of those things. There are steps to try to bring down the budget deficit. They're beginning to focus on the balance of payments, and also there are plans for structural reforms which hold out the promise of more job creation.
بعض النصائح التي تقدمونها وتدعمونها الفات أو ضريبة القيمة المضافة، هذه أيضا قد تحدث موجة تضخمية جديدة. كيف ستتعامل الحكومة من ذلك، وكيف يمكن أن نحمي الأقل دخلا؟
Well, we don't think it will. We see the effects on prices of introducing VAT as a bit less than 2%. And that's not too high a price to pay for a very important tax reform that Egypt's been trying to introduce for 20 years. The VAT is good because it's an efficient tax. It will generate more revenue at a time when the government really needs more revenue. It's not just an immediate problem either. For quite a while now, Egypt's the tax revenue as a percentage of GDP has been below 13%. That's very low for an economy with Egypt's needs and Egypt's potential. So we see this as a very important measure in making the public finances sustainable and also creating room for the kind of spending that the government needs to do, including, for example, on health and education.
الإصلاح من وجهة نظر صندوق النقد الدولي هو خفض الدعم، خفض الدعم حتى على المحروقات. كل ده بيخلق تضخم، بيرفع الأسعار. كيف نتعامل مع ذلك؟ كيف يمكن ضبط الموازنة وتحقيق هذا الإصلاح وفي نفس الوقت عدم رفع الأسعار؟
Let me explain why we think subsidy reform is so important. If you look back a couple of years before President Sisi announced the first reform of fuel subsidies, you had about a quarter of the budget being spent on interest, which is not something the government has any choice about a quarter on wages, and about a quarter on subsidies. That doesn't leave room for much else, for essential spending to support the poor, for health and education. Where are you going to find space for that spending? Subsidies is the obvious place. We also see that a lot of subsidies expenditure doesn't go to poor people, it goes to rich people because they have more cars, because they use more energy. So we think that both on income distribution grounds and with the public finances, there's a good case for subsidy reform. Now, you asked about inflation. Over the long term, big government deficits lead to inflation because the only way you can finance those is by borrowing from banks or borrowing from the central bank and money creation. So there will be an effect on prices when you cut subsidies. But cutting subsidies is the means to achieving macroeconomic stability, which means low inflation over the longer term.
سيد كريس، بصراحة تعتقد أن مشكلة مصر اقتصادية أم سياسية؟
Well, we focus on the economic problems. That's where our expertise lies. When we talk to our counterparts, I get a strong sense that they think that they can deliver on good economic policies. So we leave the politics to them, and we focus on trying to give good economic advice which will work.
لكن الحقيقة أنه الأمور السياسية أو مشاكل السياسية بتطغى على القضايا الاقتصادية، بل يعني بتؤثر تأثير كبير على الأمور الاقتصادية. تفجير الطائرة الروسية، مقتل ريجيني وتأثير ذلك على العلاقات المصرية الإيطالية، حتى قضية الخلاف حول الجزر بين مصر والمملكة السعودية، كل ده بيؤثر على الوضع الاقتصادي.
Well, I mean, I think you need to think not just about Egypt's politics, but about the politics of the region as well. Probably the single most damaging thing for Egypt in the last few months has been the Metrojet crash. That wasn't an Egyptian problem, that was an international problem. It's an international terrorism problem. You know, we see that hitting tourism revenue by about 35% this year. We expect a recovery in tourism as future years, as people's perceptions of security improve and other countries' perceptions of security improve. But I think it's an example of the ways in which Egypt can be buffeted by external shocks as well as domestic issues, and you know, those external shocks are one of the things that the IMF can help to advise on and help protect a country against.
ما هي النصيحة التي تقدمونها للحكومة المصرية؟
I would say the policies that they have articulated are generally good. The most important thing at the moment is to follow through on those policies. You know, I take, for example, the budget deficit. For each of the last 2 years, the government has set itself a target of getting the deficit below 10% of GDP. But in neither year has it been able to achieve that, despite its best efforts. So it's really important to have the policies that will support that objective. And I want to just interject at this point and say, why is the budget deficit important? Why do we talk about it so much? Because you're now in a situation where, because of the instability of the last few years and the need to, and the effect of that on revenue and the need to spend money to deal with the effects of it, public debt is now over 90% of GDP. That's a very high level for a country like Egypt, and it's one which greatly reduces the scope for using the budget to deal with future economic problems that might come up. So we think it's important to bring it down.
لكن في النهاية هذه أرقام، الناس بتسمع حضرتك تتكلم بأرقام، لكن على في أرض الواقع لا شغل، لا استثمارات، عندنا مشاكل اقتصادية، والانطباع يدخل الIMF أو صندوق النقد إلى البلاد ليساعد البلاد، فالفقراء يصبحون أكثر فقرا والأغنياء أكثر غنى.
Well, I hope that perception is completely wrong. And certainly if we have anything to do with it, it will be wrong. You know, we see a very important role for us as trying to make sure that in any IMF program or in the advice that we give, that the poorest and most vulnerable people are protected. And it's why, for example, that we recommend increasing cash transfers to poor people alongside subsidies reform to offset the effects on the poorest people. And you know, governments have decisions to make on how they use their resources and how they gain resources. You know, one of the things that we followed very closely is the commitment in the Constitution to increase health and education spending. And we want to, in our advice, respect that commitment. And so we ask, how do you achieve that? You know, these are kinds of spending that will really help people and really help poor people if they're done well. You achieve that by making room for it, by things like having VAT, by subsidies reform, so that the numbers add up and people's lives can actually be improved.
لكن هذا يعني طبعا ان احنا محتاجين سوشيال سيفتي نت، يعني شبكة ضمان وحماية لكل من هم اقل دخلا كي لا يتعرضوا لآثار الإصلاح الاقتصادي.
That's why I think cash transfers is a good idea. There are other measures that can support poor people as well. It would be a major focus of any discussions that we had with the government.
هل البرنامج الاقتصادي، هذه الخطة الاقتصادية اللي حضرتك بتتكلم عليها للحكومة، هل لا تصل إلى الناس؟ لا يفهمها الناس؟
I think that some people have been very clear about it. I think the president's been very clear. I also liked very much the Prime Minister's presentation to Parliament, which I thought was very realistic and very sincere. It's a constant challenge, I think, to communicate ideas about economics in a way which is understandable, and it's always too easy for us to retreat into jargon, and I always try and guard against that. But it would be a challenge for us as well, if our relationship with Egypt deepens, to be able to explain to the public why we're proposing things, and to try to do that in language which makes sense. And I might add, to have a dialogue as well. I mean, this kind of dialogue is very important, and I'd like to broaden that dialogue between the IMF and Egypt to include civil society more broadly, and young people, for example.
سيد كريس، ما هي توقعاتك للاقتصاد المصري في السنتين القادمتين؟
It really depends on the policies. With the right policies, I think Egypt can get to a position where there is higher growth, low inflation, an end of foreign currency shortages, and job creation. But it really needs the right policies. It's a hard road, a difficult road, but we think it can be navigated. And if we can help the government and the central bank and Egypt navigate that, we're happy to help in any way that we can.
أشكرك شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you.